Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing journal collection number 33, obviously by Emerson, dating from the year 1842, and we will start with the entry for July 21st. Profound meaning of, quote, goodwill makes insight, end quote. It is as when one finds his way to the sea by embarking on a river, or finds a passage for the mind through a lump of matter by following the path of electricity, or magnetism, or heat, or light through it. Anyhow, knows the nature by sharing the nature, is at once victim and victor. All our days are so unprofitable whilst they pass. Very often there seems so little affinity between the man and his works that it seems as if the wind wrote the book and not he. Put dittany in your greenhouse, asphodel, nepenthe, molly, poppy, rue, self-heal. Rosebugs of splendid fate living on apple trees and roses and dying by an apoplexy of sweet sensations in the golden days, middle days of July. He hoed the desert, his potatoes were pulled, his asparagus grew to trees, his melons and gourds ran for miles, and had roots like oak trees. The telescope. The greatest genius adds nothing. He only detaches from the mass of life a particle not before detached, so that I see it separated. Fate takes in the holidays and the work minutes. It was writ on your brow before you were born. The watch was wound up to go 70 years, and here to stop, and there to hasten. Just this neuralgia and that typhus fever, this good October and that most auspicious friendship were all rolled in. The little barrel of the music box revolves until all its ditties are played. Wright, Lane, Barnby, Harwood, Harrod, Doherty, Barham, Greaves, Marston, Owen. August 12th. Zanoni. We must not rail if we read the book. Of all the ministers to luxury, these novel rights are the best. It is a trick, a juggle. We are cheated into laughter or wonder by feats which only oddly combine acts that we do every day. There is no new element, no power, no furtherance. It is only confectionery, not the raising of new corn, and being such, there is no limit to its extension and multiplication. Mr. Babbage will presently invent a novel-writing machine. The old machinery cannot be disguised, however gaily vamped. Money and killing and the wandering Jew, these are the mainspring still. New names, but no new qualities in the dramatis personae. Italics and capitals are the stale substitutes for natural epigram and the revelations of loving speech. Therefore the vain endeavor to keep any bit of this fairy gold which has rolled like a brook through our hands. A thousand thoughts awoke, great rainbows seemed to span the sky, a morning among the mountains, but as we close the book we end the remembrance, nothing survives, not a ray. The power to excite which the page for moments possessed is derived by you. You read it as you read words in a dictionary, or hear a sonorous name of some foreigner and invest the stranger with some eminent gifts. But because there was not wisdom in the book, nothing fixes itself, all floats, hovers, and is dissipated forever. The young men are the readers and victims of Vivian Grey. One would say of Vivian Grey that it was written by a person of lively talent who had rare opportunities of society and access to the best anecdotes of Europe. Beckendorf is a sketch after nature, and whoever was the model was a strong head, a strong humorist, who deserved his empire for a day over these college boys. Bulwer evidently is the dissolute Alcibiades, who has been the pupil once of Socrates, and now and then recites a lesson which his master taught him. But the worst of Bulwer is that he has no style of his own. He is always a collector, and neither contributes flash, nor low life, nor learning, nor poetry, nor religion, nor description from his own stores. August 3rd. Our eagerness for anecdotes of the face, form, manners, dress, dwelling, etc., of any remarkable mind should teach us that the man should make all these anew, and not borrow them from custom. A noble brain, a searching eye, but alas, he hath no hands. Work in every hour, paid or unpaid, see only that thou work. Some play at chess, some at cards, some at the stock exchange. I prefer to play at cause and effect. Bettine is more real, more witty than George Sand or Madame de Stael, as profound and greatly more readable. Gold represents labor, and rightly opens all doors, but labor is higher, and opens secreter doors, opens man, and finds new place in the kingdom of intelligence. We read Zanoni with pleasure because magic is natural. A mean, obscure weed by the doorstep, trodden by every foot that entered the house, was the plantain. Yet when the master's foot was wounded and lame, they went out at night with a lamp to seek its leaves, and it brought refreshment and healing. Temperance is the poor plantain, a mean virtue in its daily details, but what an interest, compound on compound interest, it yields at last. Our conquered Athenaeum ought to be celebrated in the town's newspaper. What shall we say but that it is good for us to club our newspapers and journals, that it will liberalize the village to make readers here, that it will give a new and handsome hospitality to our guests, and that we shall value small subscriptions more than large ones, for they always look sincere and affectionate. August. The only poetic fact in the life of thousands and thousands is their death. No wonder they specify all the circumstances of the death of another person. To give eminency to facts, to select facts, requires genius, indigence of egoists. Phi Beta Kappa. 9 cold hurrahs at Cambridge to Lord Ashburton. Pity they should lie so about their keen sensibility to cold hurrahs. Men of the world value truth in proportion to their ability. Of such, and especially of diplomatists, one has a right to expect wit and ingenuity to avoid the lie, if they must comply with the form. Elizabeth Hoare repeats Colonel Shattuck's toast to poor K. Quote, "The orator of the day, his subject deserves the attention of every agriculturist." It does honor to Colonel Shattuck. I wish the great lords and diplomatists at Cambridge had only as much ingenuity and respect for truth. The speeches froze me to my place. At last Bancroft thawed the ice and released us, and I inwardly thanked him. Balzac has 2 merits, talent and Paris. The doctrine in which the world has acquiesced, has it not, on this much agitated question of the classic and romantic is, that it is not a question of times nor of forms, but of methods. That the classic is creative and the romantic is aggregative. That the Greek in the Christian Germany would have built a cathedral, and that the romantic in our time builds a Parthenon custom house. We stopped at a farmhouse at Lincoln and asked for milk, and when we came away I offered money, but this was wrong. We injure everybody with this money, both ourselves and the receivers. We owe men a great behavior, and knowing that we have $50 in our pocket, we skulk and idle and misbehave, and do not put ourselves on our courtesy and sentiment. Never look at my book, and perhaps it will be better worth looking at. My thought today was how rightly Swedenborg pictured each man with a sphere, for we use the moral qualities, the word great, and really conceive of Socrates, Milton, or Goethe as a large personality. But this also occurred as the security of the institution of marriage against the Shelleys of the time, that we need in these twilights of the gods all the conventions of the most regulated life to crutch our lame and indigent loves. The least departure from the usage of marriage would bring too strong a tide against us, for so weak a reed as modern love to withstand. Its frigidities, its ebbs already needs all the protection and humoring they can get from the forms and manners. August 11th. Yes, they are all children, and when we speak of actual parties, They must be borne in mind. Queenie says that according to Edmund Hosmer, it was a piece of weak indulgence in the good God to make plums and peaches. August 20th. Last night a walk to the river with Margaret, and saw the moon broken in the water, interrogating. Then followed the history of the surrounding mines. Margaret said she felt herself amidst tendencies, did not regret life, nor accuse the imperfections of her own or their performance whilst these strong native tendencies so appeared, and in the children of all of us will be ripened. I told her that I could not discern the least difference between the first experience and the latest in my own case. I had never been otherwise than indolent, never strained a muscle, and only saw a difference in the circumstance, not in the man. At first a circle of boys, my brothers at home with aunt and cousins, or the schoolroom, all agreed that my verses were obscure nonsense. And now a larger public says the same thing, obscure nonsense. And yet both conceded that the boy had wit. A little more excitement now, but the fact identical both in my consciousness and in my relations. Margaret would beat with the beating heart of nature. I feel that underneath the greatest life, though it were Jove's or Jehovah's, must lie an astonishment that embosoms both action and thought. In talking with W. Ellery Channing on Greek mythology, as it was believed at Athens, I could not help feeling how fast the keys to such possibilities is lost. The key to the faith of men perishes with the faith. 1,000 years hence it will seem less monstrous that those acute Greeks believed in the fables of Mercury and Pan than that these learned and practical nations of modern Europe and America, these physicians, metaphysicians, mathematicians, critics, and merchants, believe this Jewish apologue of the poor Jewish boy, and how they contrive to attach that accidental history to the religious idea, and this famous dogma of the triune God, etc., etc. Nothing more facile, so long as the detachment is not made, nothing so wild and incredible the moment after that shall happen. Lecturers, Bancroft, Giles, Mann, Rantoul, Longfellow, Theodore Parker, Dr. S. G. Howe, Dr. Charles T. Jackson, George B. Emerson. September 1st. A walk in the most wonderful sunset this afternoon with W. E. Channing. The sunset is very unlike anything that is underneath it, but it must always seem unreal until it has figures that are equal to it. The sunset wanted men, but unutterable is all we know of nature. How well we know certain winds, certain lights, certain aspects of the soil and the grove, yet no words can begin to convey that which they express to us monthly and daily. The reason why lunatics swear is because their exaggerated sensation requires an exaggerated speech. But nature never swears, loves temperate expressions and sober colors, green grass, fawns and drabs, grays and blues and dark mixed, now and then a grim Acherontian fungus. Yet the sunset was vows of love of the angels. Swearing has gone out of vogue on the earth because society, which means discriminating persons, rejects unmeasured speech. Oaths never go out of fashion, but are always beautiful and thrilling. But the sham of them, which is called profane swearing, is rightly voted a bore. Sham dams we do not like. Results. Report of a committee of one on the subject of nature. If this is the age of criticism, let it be written greatly from a point of view that is at least Olympian or super-Olympian, and treats gods and men alike. It must be roundly told the upper power that, though there is a landscape, it is not yet peopled, that nature is not enjoyed or enjoyable until man finds his completion, that we have examined very carefully both sides of the thing, and have ascertained, and do here declare, that there is no reconcilement. Want is always larger than have, idea than fact. Consider also that our practical Pyrrhonism is increased by our observation that the most lamented circumstance is the source of new power, and that we owe our wisdom to our folly. It is much to know that poetry has been written this very day under this very roof by your side. We may well be slow of belief concerning genius, since we give up all to it as soon as we know it. I pardon everything to it. Everything is trifling before it. I will wait for it for years, and sit it in contempt before the doors of that inexhaustible blessing. You say perhaps nature will yet give me the joy of friendship, but our pleasures are in some proportion to our forces. I have so little vital force that I could not stand the dissipation of a flowing and friendly life. I should die of consumption in 3 months. But now I husband all my strength in this bachelor life I lead. No doubt shall be a well-preserved old gentleman. September 4th. A few noble victims life shows us who do and suffer with temper and proportion. The rest are slight people and shirk work, to use the common phrase. But every deed deepens the literature and exalts the art of the doer, and the soul doubles, trebles, quadruples, and infinitely multiplies itself. Marston's tragedy, The Patrician's Daughter. When we have such a gift, let us read it and thank God. Undoubtedly it may have faults, but what a benefit to speak to my imagination and paint with electric pencil a new new forms on my vacant sky. This is refreshing to read, written with so much simplicity and spirit. The character of Mordaunt very natural and familiar to English experience in the Cannings, Pulteneys, Burkes, Foxes. The Lady Mabel also well and easily conceived. Pity that the catastrophe should be well wrought by a wholesale lie on the part of the Lady Lydia, which lovers can so easily pierce. It is a weak way of making a play whose crisis ought, as in life, to grow out of the faults and the conditions of the parties, as in Goethe's Tasso. The play seems on all accounts, but one, namely, the lapse of 5 years between two acts, to be eminently fit for representation. The "no" of Mordaunt is wonderful for the stage. Editor's note. Passages from "experience on nature and books and on optical illusion about persons" followed. Essays, second series, pages 50 and 52. End editor's note. I remember that Mr. Samuel Ripley said to the young coxcomb from the South, "Fiddle faddle," in reply to all his brag. Pity that we do not know how to say fiddle faddle to people who take our time and do not exercise our wit. Most men are dupes of the hour, dupes of the nearest object. They cannot put things in perspective, but the nearest is still the largest. They talk with inferiors and do not know it, do not know that they are talking down. As on a mountain, you must level your gun at another mountain and see if the shot run out of the barrel, to know that the summit is lower than yours. The eye cannot measure it. The poor Irish Mary Corbett, whose 5 weeks' infant died here 3 months ago, sends word to Lydian that, she cannot send back her bandbox, in which the child's body was carried to Boston. She must please give it to her, and she cannot send back the little handkerchief with which its head was bound up. She must please give it to her. Nathaniel Hawthorne's reputation as a writer is a very pleasing fact, because his writing is not good for anything, and this a tribute to the man. Sam Ward says, "I like women, they are so finished." Edmund Hosmer's suffrage on Sunday evening to Alcott was good, so qualified and so strong. I said to him, what is really Alcott's distinction, that rejoicing or desponding, this man always trusts his principles, never deserts it, never mistakes the convenient, customary way of doing the thing for the right and might, whilst all vulgar reformers, like these community people, after sounding their sentiment trumpet, rely on the arm of money and the law. It is the effect of his nature, of his natural clearness of spiritual sight, which makes this confusion of thought impossible to him. I have a company who travel with me in the world, and one or other of whom I must still meet, whose office none can supply to me. Edward Stubler, my Methodist tarbox, Wordsworth's peddler, Mary Roch, Alcott, Manzoni's Fra Cristoforo, Swedenborg, Mrs. Black, and now Greaves and his disciple Lane. supreme people who represent with whatever defects the ethical idea. Elizabeth Hoare, the true Elizabeth Hoare, that is, felt the element of self in her intellectual and in her devout friends. The former loved truth, but loved the self in the truth. The latter would make sacrifices, but never forgot their claims. Strange, all is strange. O Edith Small, thyself strange, life is strange, and God the greatest strange and stranger in his universe. The lady said that S. never forgot himself. He was affected, but his affection was natural to him. Also, that the only thing she was afraid of was being frightened. Mr. C. sold his Boston house and went to live in the country because he found he could not make a beau. It was a very sensible reason, and yet Charles's criticism on it was that he should have raised his ceiling and made his rooms larger, because an awkward man in the area of the State House or on the Common is no longer awkward. Large space, high rooms have the same exhilarating and liberating quality as great light. A dance in a half-lighted ballroom would be a sad affair, but make the light intense, and the spirits of the party all rise instantly. There are two choices for one who is unhappy in an evening party. One, to go no more into such companies, which is flight. The other, to frequent them until their law is wholly learned, and they become indifferent, which is conquest. O fine victim, martyr child, clowns and scullions are content with themselves, and thou art not. Intellect always puts an interval between the subject and the object. Affection would blend the two. For weal or for woe, I clear myself from the thing I contemplate. I grieve, but am not a grief. I love, but am not a love. Marriage in what is called the spiritual world is impossible because of the inequality between every subject and every object. Young S. went out tutor and the family traveling through Italy. It would have been so easy to have made his life joyful. One human creature made happy. Yet they contrived to make him feel that he was a servant, and poisoned every day, and he was come back with a fixed disgust at aristocracy. Too happy if he has, too cheap the price he paid, if he has really attained to despise or to pity their joyless joys. But I doubt, I doubt. I hate this sudden crystallization in my poets. A pleasing poem, but here is a rude expression, a feeble line, a wrong word. I am sorry, returns the poet, but it stands so written. But you can alter it, I say. Not one letter, replies the hardened bard. I questioned when I read Tennyson's Ulysses whether there is taste in England to do justice to the poet, whether the riches of Dante's greatness would find an equal apprehension. Yet it seems feeble to deny it. The poet and the lover of poetry are born at one instant twins, and when Wordsworth wrote Laodamia, Landor found it out and celebrated it, and so did an Edinburgh critic. We are dissipated with our fine reading. We have too many fine books, and as those who have had too much cake and candy long for a brown crust, so we like the Albany cultivator. September. There is reality, however, in our relations to our friend, is there not? Yes, and I hail the grander lights and hints that proceed from these as the worthiest fruits of our being thus far. But do not these show that the existence you so loved is not closed? I have no presentiment of that. Alas, my friend, you have no generosity. You cannot give yourself away. I see the law of all your friendships. It is a bargain. You tell your things, your friend tells his things, and as soon as the inventory is complete, you take your hats. Do you see that the kitten chasing so prettily her own tail? If you could see with her eyes, you would see her surrounded with hundreds of figures performing complex dramas. How slowly we learn that witchcraft and ghostcraft, palmistry and magic, and all the other so-called superstitions, which, with so much police, boastful skepticism, and scientific committees, we had finally dismissed to the moon as nonsense, are really no nonsense at all, but subtle and valid influences, always starting up, mowing, muttering in our path, and shading our day. The things are real, only they have shed their skin, with which much insult we have gibbeted and buried. One person fastens an eye on us, and the very graves of the memory render up their dead. It is with literature as it is with the faculty of medicine. The poor man catches the disease and dies. Nobody knows how. The rich man takes the same disease and dies also, but has the honor and the satisfaction of having the disease named by his physician and a council of physicians. It is a great matter to have the thing named. Chemistry, entomology, conic sections, medicine, each science, each province of science will come to satisfy all demands. The whole of poetry, of mythology, of ethics, of demonology will be expressed by it. A new rhetoric, new methods of philosophy, perhaps new political parties will celebrate the cumulation of each one. Just to fill the hour, that is happiness. It pains me never that I cannot give you an accurate answer to the question, what is God? What is the operation we call providence? And the like. There lies the answer. There it exists, present, omnipresent to you, to me. I woke up and found the dear old world, wife, babe, and mother, Concord and Boston, the dear old spiritual world, and even the dear old devil not far off. Quote-unquote blind love, yes, love lives in the stratum of the relative and is blind to the absolute. But self is blind too, and not lovelily, but odiously. As far as the element comes in, we run on about ourselves and never perceive that we have long lost the ear of our companion. Transcendental criticism. With this eternal demand for more, which belongs to our modest constitutions, how can we be helped? The gods themselves could not help us. They are just as badly off themselves. T.P. has beautiful fangs, and the whole amphitheater delights to see him worry and tear his victim. Rings and jewels are not gifts, but apologies for gifts. The only gift is a portion of thyself. That were a right problem for a dramatist to solve. Given a bandit the strongest temptation and opportunity for violence or plunder, how to bring off the man of wit by his wit only, exercised not immediately, but directly through speech. It is a problem perfectly easy to solve in action whenever the right Caesar comes. He does not exert courage but wit. The corsair has caught a captain. Sterling writes well of sculpture, and if I were rich, I would have my reception room for my friends filled with statues or casts of all the gods to preach serenity to me and my friends. But it is vain to make a matter of conscience of calmness. A man will not become grand by accusing himself, but grandeur will come and where God wills, like a fine day. T sells me peat or wood or apples for more money than he sells the same to Hosmer, who can use certain test questions or examinations which I cannot apply. Well, do I not exclude T also from the use of certain test questions and examinations in reference to other matters more important to his honor and standing as a man than are his peat and apples to me? The highest criticism should be written in poetry. Goethe received 4, Fichte 5, and Richter 7 louis d'ors a sheet for their best works. A louis equals $4. I have a kind of promise to write, one of these days, a verse or two to the praise of my native city, which in common days we often rail at, yet which has great merits to usward. That, too, like every city, has certain virtues as a museum of the arts. The parlors of private collectors, the Athenaeum Gallery, and the college become the city of the city. Then a city has this praise, that as the hell or band of music is heard outside, beyond the din of carts, so the beautiful in architecture or in political and social institutions endures. All else comes to naught, so that the antiquities and permanent things in each city are good and fine. In London, Alcott saw Carlyle, Lane O'Connell, Robert Owen, Herod, Marston, Wright, Barham, Browning, Milnes, W. J. Fox, Harwood, Dr. Bowring, Dr. Elliotson, Morgan, Doherty, Barnby, George Thompson. All persons are puzzles until at last we find in some word or act the key to the man, to the woman. Straightway all their past words and actions lie in light before us. Men are so gregarious that they have no solitary merits. They all, the reputed leaders and all, lean on some other, and this superstitiously and not from insight or his merit. They follow a fact, they follow success and not skill. Therefore, as soon as the success stops, fails, and Mr. Jackson blunders in building Pemberton Square, they quit him. Already they remember that long ago they suspected Mr. Jackson's judgment, and they transfer the repute of judgment to the next succeeder who has not yet blundered. Vegetables, plants are the young of the universe, the future of men, but not yet ripe for that rank in nature. Yet they are all handsome, and men, let them once be 15 years old, are for the most part unsightly. The reason is that the men, though young, are already dissipated, but the maples and ferns are not. Yet, no doubt, when they come to it, they too will curse and swear. In the wood I heard the laughter of the crows. Milnes brought Carlyle to the railway and showed him the departing train. Carlyle looked at it and then said, "These are our poems, Milnes." Milnes ought to have answered, "And our histories, Carlyle." But it is worth noticing how fast the poet can dispose of these formidable facts. One sees the factory village and the railway and thinks of Wordsworth, and what will be his dismay. Wordsworth has the sense to see that this also falls in, en bête de plus, with the known multitude of mechanical facts, and that all mechanics have not gained a grain of weight from the addition. The spiritual fact alike remains unalterable from many or by few particulars, as no mountain is of any appreciable height to break the curve of the sphere. Men are great in their own despite. They achieve a certain greatness, but it was while they were toiling to achieve another conventional one. The boy at college apologizes for not learning the tutor's task and tries to learn it, but stronger nature gives him Otway and Messinger to read, or betrays him into a stroll to Mount Auburn in study hours. The poor boy, instead of thanking the gods and slighting the mathematical tutor, ducks before the functionary and poisons his own fine pleasures by a perpetual penitence. Well, at least, let that one never brag of the choice he made, as he might have well done if he had known what he did when he was doing it. Alcott, when he went to England, wished to carry with him miniatures of Elizabeth Peabody, of Margaret Fuller, and of me. I remember once that A thought that the head would soon put off from its trunk, which would perish whilst the brain would unfold a new and higher organization. I am most of the time a very young child who does not pretend to oversee nature and dictate its law. I play with it, like other infants, as my toy. I see sun and moon and river without asking their causes. I am pleased by the mysterious music of falling water or the rippling and washing against the shores, without knowing why. Yet, child as I am, I know that I may in any moment wake up to the sense of authority and deity herein. A seer, a prophet, passing by will bring me to it. Poetry will, nay, I shall think it in the austere woods, and they will tremble and turn to dreams. Richter said, quote, "In the great world I despise the men and their joyless joys, but I esteem the women. In them alone can one investigate the spirit of the times." End quote. I think that in my house, where there are no ears, no fine person should be so much wronged as to be asked to sing. White lies. It shall be the law of this society that no member shall be reckoned a liar who is a sportsman and indicates the wrong place when asked where he shot his partridge, or who is an angler and misremembers where he took his trout, or who is an engineer and misdirects his inquiring friends as to the best mill privilege, or who is a merchant and forgets in what stock he proposes to invest, or who is an author and being asked if he wrote an anonymous book, replies in the negative. Ghost under the floor. It shall not be the law. Editor's Note: the account of Edward Everett, which occupies the following 9 pages of the journal, seems to have been written at this time. Mr. Emerson introduced almost all of it into a lecture delivered in the latter years of his active life, perhaps 1867 and later, after Everett's death. This called Historic Notes of Life and Letters in New England. Mr. Cabot first published in the Riverside edition of the works in the volume Lectures and Biographical Sketches a year or two after Emerson died. The opening passages of the journal entry, and one or two others that show his young enthusiasm for Everett, also one or two not printed in the posthumous volume, are here given. End of editor's note. Edward Everett. There was an influence on the young people from Everett's genius which was almost comparable to that of Pericles in Athens. That man had an inspiration that did not go beyond his head, but which made him the genius of elegance. He had a radiant beauty of persons, of a classic style, a heavy, large eye, marble lids, which gave the impression of mass which the slightness of his form needed, sculptured lips, a voice of such rich tones, such precise and perfect utterance that, although slightly nasal, it was the most mellow and beautiful and correct of all the instruments of the time. The word that he spoke, and the manner in which he spoke it, became current and classical in New England. Especially beautiful were his poetic quotations. He quoted Milton, or rarely Byron, and sometimes a verse from Watts, and with such sweet and perfect modulation that he seemed to give as much beauty as he borrowed, and whatever he had quoted will seldom be remembered by any who heard him without inseparable association with his voice and genius. This eminently beautiful person was followed like an Apollo from church to church, wherever the fame that he would preach led, by all the most cultivated and intelligent youths with grateful admiration. His appearance in any pulpit lighted up all countenances with delight. The smallest anecdote of his behavior or conversation was eagerly caught and repeated, and every young scholar could repeat brilliant sentences from his sermons with mimicry, good or bad, of his voice. The church was dismissed, but the bright image of that eloquent form followed the boy home to his bedchamber, and not a sentence was written in a theme, not a declamation attempted in the college chapel, but showed the omnipresence of his genius to youthful heads. He thus raised the standard of taste in writing and speaking in New England. Meantime, all this was a pure triumph of rhetoric. This man had neither intellectual nor moral principles to teach. He had no thoughts. It was early asked, when Massachusetts was full of his fame, what truths he had thrown into circulation, and how he had enriched the general mind, and agreed that only in graces of manner, only in a new perception of Grecian beauty, had he opened our eyes. It was early observed that he had no warm personal friends. Yet his genius made every youth his defender, and boys filled their mouths with arguments to prove that the orator had a heart. Everett's fame had the effect of giving a new luster to the university, which it greatly needed. Students flocked thither from the South and West, from the remote points of Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, and Louisiana. Well, this bright morning had a short continuance. Mr. Everett was soon attracted by the vulgar prizes of politics, and quit coldly the splendid career which opened before him, and which not circumstances but his own genius had made, for the road to Washington, where it is said he has had the usual fortune of flattery and mortification, but is wholly lost to any real and manly usefulness. Everett had as lief his manuscript was in your pocket, he read so well. In every conversation, even the highest, there is a certain trick, one may say, which may be soon learned by an acute person, and then that particular style be continued indefinitely. This is true of Veres, Alcott's, Lane's, and all such specialists or mystics. More true of these than of other classes. Sam Ward said that men died to break up their styles, but nature had no objection to Goethe's living, for he did not form one. September 27th was a fine day, and Hawthorne and I set forth on a walk. We went first to the factory where Mr. Damon makes Domet clothes, but his mills were standing still, his house is empty. Nothing so small but comes to honor and has its shining moment somewhere, and so was it here with our little Assabet or North Branch. It was falling over the rocks into silver, and above was expanded into this tranquil lake. After looking about us a few moments, we took the road to Stowe. The day was full of sunshine, and it was a luxury to walk in the midst of all this warm and colored light. The days of September are so rich that it seems natural to walk to the end of one's strength and then fall prostrate, saturated with the fine floods, and cry, Nunc dimittis me. Fringed gentians, a thorn bush with red fruit, wild apple trees whose fruit hung like berries, and grapevines were the decorations of the path. We scarcely encountered man or boy in our road, nor saw any in the fields. This depopulation lasted all day. But the outlines of the landscape were so gentle that it seemed as if we were in a very cultivated country, and elegant persons must be living just over yonder hills. 3 or 4 times, or oftener, we saw the entrance to their lordly park, but nothing in the farms or in the houses made this good, and it is to be considered that when any large brain is born in these towns it is sent at 16 or 20 years to Boston or New York, and the country is tilled only by the inferior class of the people, by the second crop or rowan of the men. Hence all these shiftless, poverty-struck pig farms. In Europe, where society has an aristocratic structure, the land is full of men of the best stock and the best culture, whose interest and pride it is to remain half of the year, at least, on their estates, and to fill these with every convenience and ornament. Of course, these make model farms and model architecture, and are a constant education to the eye and hand of the surrounding population. Our walk had no incidents. It needed none, for we were in excellent spirits, had much conversation, for we were both old collectors who had never had opportunity before to show such other our cabinets, so that we could have filled with matter much longer days. We agreed that it needed a little dash of humor or extravagance in the traveler to give occasion to incident in his journey. Here we sober men, easily pleased, kept on the outside of the land, and did not by so much as a request for a cup of milk creep into any farmhouse. If want of pence in our pocket or some vagary in our brain drove us into these "huts where poor men lie," to crave dinner or night's lodging, it would be so easy to break into some mesh of domestic romance, learn so much pathetic private history, perchance see the first blush mantle on the cheeks of the young girl when the mail stage came or did not come, or even get entangled ourselves in some thread of gold or gray. Then again, the opportunities which the taverns once offered the traveler of witnessing and even sharing in the joke and the politics of the teamster and farmers on the road are now no more. The temperance society emptied the bar room. It is a cold place. Hawthorne tried to smoke a cigar, but I observed he was soon out on the piazza. After noon we reached Stowe and dined, and then continued our journey towards Harvard, making our day's walk, according to our best computation, about 20 miles. The last miles, however, we rode in a wagon, having been challenged by a friendly fatherly gentleman, who knew my name and my father's name and history, and who insisted on doing the honors of his town to us, and of us to his townsmen, for he fairly installed us at the tavern, introduced us to the doctor and to General Blank, and bespoke the landlord's best attention to our wants. We get the view of the Nashua River Valley from the top of Oak Hill as we enter Harvard Village. Next morning we began to walk at 6:30 o'clock from the Shaker village, distant 3.5 miles. Whilst the good sisters were getting ready our breakfast, we had a conversation with Seth Blanchard and Cloutman of the Brethren, who gave an honest account by yea and by nay of their faith and practice. They were not stupid like some whom I have seen of their society, and not worldly like others. The conversation on both parts was frank enough. With the downright I will be downright, thought I, and Seth showed some humor. I doubt not we should have had our way with them to a good extent, not quite after the manner of Hadrian or Magbin or the monks of Liege, if we could have stayed 24 hours, although my powers of persuasion were crippled by a disgraceful barking cold, and Hawthorne inclined to play Jove more than Mercurius. After breakfast, Cloutman showed us the farm, vineyard, orchard, barn, pressing room, etc. The vineyard contained two noble arcades of grapes, both white and Isabella, full of fruit, the orchard fine varieties of pears and peaches and apples. They have 1,500 acres here, a tract of woodland in Ashburnham, and a sheep pasture somewhere else, enough to supply the wants of the 200 souls in this family. They are in many ways an interesting society, but at present have an additional importance as an experiment of socialism which so falls in the temper of the times. What improvement is made forever. This capitalist is old and never dies. His subsistence was long ago secured, and he has gone on now for long scores of years in adding easily compound interest to his stock. Moreover, this settlement is of great value in the heart of the country as a model farm, in the absence of that rural nobility we talked of yesterday. Here are improvements invented or adopted from the other Shaker communities, which the neighboring farmers see and copy. From the Shaker village we came to Littleton, and thence to Acton, still in the same redundance of splendor. It was like a day of July, and from Acton we sauntered leisurely homeward to finish the 19 miles of our second day before 4 in the afternoon. In a town which you enter for the first time at late sunset, the trees and houses look pictorial in the twilight, but you can never play tricks with old acquaintances. There is something very agreeable in fatigue. I am willing to die, having had my swing of the fair day, and 7 times in his life I suppose every man sings, "Now, Lord, let thy servant depart." Landor, though, like other poets, he has not been happy in love, has written admirable sentences on the passion. Perhaps at Hawthorne their disappointment taught them to write these things. Well, it is probable. One of Landor's sentences was worth a divorce. Quote, "Those to whom love is a secondary thing love more than those to whom it is a primary." End quote. This thought appeared in all the Shakers said about admission of members to their society, that people came and proved themselves. They soon showed that they were and remained or departed, as the Spirit made manifest, alike to themselves and to the society. No man should join them for a living, and no man should be turned off because he was poor or bedridden, but only for not being of them. Cloutman told us their hospitality was costly, for they entertain without price all the friends of any member who visit them. We talked of Scott. There is some greatness in defying posterity, and writing for the hour, and so being a harper. Piety, like chivalry, has no stationary exemplar, but is evanescent and receding like rainbows. You cannot find any specimen of a religious man now in your society. You hear the fame of one. You go far and find him, and he begins, quote, "I had a friend in my youth," etc. Yet it seems as if nothing would make such a good picture in national sketches as genuine Connecticut, if you could lay your hand on it. At night the frogs were loud, but the eagle was silent in his cliff. If, in this last book of Wordsworth, there be dullness, it is yet the dullness of a great and cultivated mind. We have our culture, like Alston, from Europe, and are Europeans. Perhaps we must be content with this and thank God for Europe for a while yet, and there shall be no great Yankee until in the unfolding of our population and power England kicks the beam and English authors write to America, which must happen ere long. I have not yet begun to regret much of the omission to see any particular part of nature or art, but perhaps as we live longer we begin to compare more narrowly the chances of life with the things to be seen in it, and count the Niagaras we have not visited. For me, not only Niagara, but the Prairie, and the Ohio, and the Mississippi rivers are still only names. And yet, better see nothing beyond your village than to go coldly and hardly to work to see the Meccas of the mind. It were indeed an enlargement, a duplication of life, if, in fit company, and with good reason, I can go to Italy, but Florence is not Florence if the visit is forced. Avarice, ambition, almost all talents are restless and vagrant. They go up to the cities, but religion is a good rooter. This is the end of Part 4 of Emerson's Journal Collection, number 33. In our next video, we will pick up where we left off with the entry for October 8th. Thank you for listening.